Welcome back to Medicare ABCs, the Masterclass edition, available only here on GH2 Unfiltered. Let's get into Part B. It says on the card here, as you can see, medical. I would have called it services. So this is everything which is not inpatient hospitalization, right? What does that mean? Doctor's visits, of course. Lab tests, durable medical equipment, for example. These are all covered under Part B. Now, the list of all the services here is too extensive. I'll add one very important one, which is that certain medications, meaning, for example, infusion therapy, for example, chemotherapy that you take in a medical setting, is covered under Part B. It is not Part D, which is to be administered at your home. We'll get into that when we talk about Part D. For Part B, a different setup than Part A fundamentally, which is that you can see you pay a monthly premium. And this is what you're used to from everyday life. For most persons, it is $148.50 a month. Now, you can remember the first part where I was talking about silos, or the idea that, different topics are no longer separate. And here it is here. And here's the reason why I'm on this corner saying that we need to have advance notice and you should prepare in advance. And the reason is that your Part B premium, and as well as your Part D premium, which we will get to, is affected by your household income. So now for some of you, this matters differently, right? Because the sources of income and the rate at which you're taxed and how it's accounted for taxable income can differ. For example, Social Security is not fully taxed, whereas earned income from a job is fully taxed. And now you can see all the number of dizzying combinations that can occur as you're trying to compare your existing coverage compared to Medicare. And that's getting more complicated, of course, because people are working beyond 65. So then now the comparison here does depend on what your household income would be as you're trying to decide, okay, do I stay with my employer-based plan, or do I choose original Medicare and a private Medicare configuration? And while I can't answer that for you because that is your private decision, you can see now that the numbers start to move. And as a result, it makes all the sense in the world to consider the way that it's going to move so that you can choose the most efficient path. Okay. Back to the main point about Part B. So you can see there's an annual deductible, $203 per year, reset annually. So sorry for people who are born in December and turn on Part B and Part A during December, and then you go on December 3rd to your doctor. It costs $250. And you go to a follow-up in January of the next year. That January, your deductible has been reset to zero. Okay? So I need to make some very important subtle points which are not part of the slide. I promise to give you things that were not going to be in the public domain. Which is that the $203 is kept track of by either your Medicare Advantage plan carrier or original Medicare, the CMS. That entirely depends on the proper administration and billing to the right parties. In other words, you can remember the phrase garbage in, garbage out. Here it is right here. Which is, let's just say, for example, it's January 3rd. You go to your doctor. You go to doctor number 1 on January 3rd. You go to doctor number 3 on January 7th. And the doctor number 1 charges $295. Well, you would have to pay the deductible of $203. And then it kind of depends on how your doctor then bills the difference between $295 and $203. Here's your insider's clue. I tell people, go and find your doctor's appointment that costs $205 and go and pay in full to eliminate the controversy. Now it's now January 7th, right? So you've gone to doctor number 1, and now you go to doctor number 3 on the 7th. The issue is the second doctor is unaware, Medigap carrier unaware, maybe Medicare Advantage carrier also all unaware that you've gone to the doctor on January 3rd. And the reason is that the doctor on January 3rd, that office has not processed it immediately and gotten all the way through the system. When this happens, there's no way for doctor number 3 to know what's going on. There's no way. Right? In other words, garbage in, garbage out. The data hasn't been updated correctly as yet on January 7th. So you can see what ends up happening here. It is an annual deductible of $203, but that is as far as the CMS is also accurately keeping track. Okay, meaning that it is dependent on the CMS to keep track. I'm just going to tell you that the number of errors here is somewhat alarming due to the lag time. I don't have a fix for it, right? In other words, what ends up happening is I'll get a call in the end of that January from a client. The client will say, Jay, I did these steps and my Medigap carrier denied paying for doctor number 3. Well, yeah, the reason is the Medigap carrier looked to the CMS and said, okay, has this person fulfilled the Part B deductible? No? Okay, then we don't pay. Right? In other words, the Medigap carrier also will depend on this information. It is not that the Medigap carrier is going to be violating their obligation under the contract. I find that almost impossible to believe. After you reach the $203 deductible under Part B, then it's a structure that many people know, which is co-insurance, means that Medicare will pay 80% and you are responsible for 20%. So for example, on a particular surgical procedure in an outpatient setting, let's say it's $10,000. So what happens is Medicare has a list that is adjusted by your region, and they have a sticker price. So let's call that $10,000, in which case Medicare pays 80% and you're responsible for 20% or $2,000. Now remember when I said this list? That is what I'm going to call the approved amount. The approved amount. Okay? So Medicare is paying 80% of the approved amount, and you're responsible for 20% of the approved amount. Okay? The fine print here is that doctors can legally charge more than the approved amount. Now, there are exceptions here. Let me just first start here. Beyond the scope of today, there are states that disallow this. There are states that disallow the excess charged. Don't be too happy, because the reality is that the Medigap and Medicare Advantage carriers also have adjusted prices or lower benefits on the back end. So it's not as if you could game the system by just simply moving to a place where they don't allow the excess charge. So let's just go back to what the excess charge is. So as I said, you've got this list of treatments and there's $10,000 in a particular treatment. The reality is the doctor in this instance could have charged $11,500, correct? In other words, 15% more than the approved amount of $10,000. What ends up happening there is you owe the 20% of the $10,000, which is $2,000. You also owe the entirety of the excess charge. The entirety. So $2,000 here, plus you owe the entire $1,500. In other words, the 15% extra that the Part B provider has charged. is entirely your responsibility under original Medicare. People might say, okay, well, and I've reviewed this in the past. You can look at when I compare Plan G and Plan N on the publicly available YouTube channel. I go through amount of time to consider the excess charge and whether or not this is likely. Like I said, in certain states, it is not allowable. New York, for example, you cannot charge the Part B excess. Well, in those, the question is whether or not this is going to be likely. And while it is true that most doctors accept Medicare as full assignment, and that is the terminology you should use, you can ask the doctor, do you take Medicare payment as full assignment? That means that do they accept the $10,000 list price as full payment? Okay. The question is whether or not this is likely, and so now I just want to cast a couple of points which aren't really mentioned as widely on the internet, just kind of as extra things to consider, because it gives you a framework and an understanding of how I'm looking at insurance matters and financial topics when you're trying to be the buyer. Okay, when you're trying to be the buyer. So the point here is that we don't have a crystal ball under any of these things in the bottom part of this slide. You know, for example, doctors were going to carry a huge amount of debt, of educational debt. And if someone made me the CMS czar, and what does occur right now is, whether you know it or not, the CMS is actually pushing down the payment rate to doctors and hospitals. And it's called something using the sequester. So in other words, in all of the budgetary horse trading, what is going on under the surface is, in fact, lower payments to doctors and hospitals. Well, that's all fine, but let's just say you're the primary care physician in a town of 20,000 people. Your educational debt doesn't also decline, and you don't get to go and say, that doctor doesn't get to go and say, hey, my payment rate from Medicare declined. Can I lower the amount of educational debt? That is not the way this works, right? And that is just common sense. I'd put it to another way, for example, which is, while people may think, oh, well, doctors shouldn't do this, that's detestable, and, you know, that's something horrific, just pretend that doctor is your grandchild, minus $300,000, after have gone through that to become a medical doctor. All the competition, stress, etc., of which many people fail along the way. In other words, we can't be sure. We simply don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. But again, if I'm the CMS czar, it makes all the sense in the world. I have 63 million people on Medicare Plus and climbing, and possibly 25 million extra if Medicare eligibility declines to 60. I've got to make these numbers fit. I don't get just to jack up Part B for very technical reasons. I don't get to just simply increase the premium. That is not going to be the path. However, all of these other fine prints here about Medicare, one of them is the Medicare payment rate that they do have control over. So the point of insurance here is to kind of think through for yourself, okay, what do I need? How much can I afford? And what coverage, how probable is it? For some of you, that's going to be, look, I don't want to worry about some other Jay becoming the head of the CMS. Right? I don't want to worry about that. In which case, I want to pay the extra money to cover this excess charge. For some of you, it's like, well, that extra money is groceries. I need to pay my electric bill. Gasoline is $3.20 a gallon, etc., etc. I'm 100% with that. Right? I didn't say, nor will I ever say, this is worth it at every, with the price insensitive. That is not my analysis. That's not my recommendation. That's never going to be my recommendation. Okay? Because it has everything to do with price. Of course it does. This is financial topic. Let's continue on. Because of Part A and Part B and the way they work, you can see it is very similar to what I would call a very good chassis, excellent chassis to a car. Very good. The premiums are low. The data, meaning what is called the Part A deductible, what is called the Part B deductible, that stuff is known and accepted by everyone, period. There's no debate, is the reality. It may seem fuzzy to you whether or not it falls under Part A and Part B. That I understand. Nevertheless, the carriers don't get it wrong. The CMS does not get it wrong. It is known. It is federally defined. There's not lots of leeway. There's no squishy area here. The issue is, as I put on the italicized portion, which is Medicare has no annual limit on out-of-pocket expenses. And this is a very important function of insurance, right? Which is that I'm recommending insurance to certain persons or certain financial contracts to other persons, making those financial recommendations. Why? Because I'm trying to cover scenarios which you may not thought as high probability, either due to random chance or, for example, something that you know about. Let's say you're type 1 diabetic. You know that there are different scenarios, right? The issue here is that you're trying to measure the financial downside if that something happens. Here, so while the Medicare card is a very good chassis, it still leaves this little window. It leaves this window of unlimited downside. And for that reason, that's why we've got Medigap, Medicare Advantage, which I'm going to discuss after Part D. And for your takeaway here is to always remember this, and part of this is a PSA, it always is I promise you that someone you know, someone in your area, someone at your local community group, whether that be community-based, religious-based, it doesn't matter. Somebody has this wrong. And for the alternatives and at their price, this should not be your configuration. The Medicare card and Part D alone should not be your configuration because of that sentence in italics by itself. So if you already know this, please forgive me for talking slowly now, but I promise you someone you know doesn't. So I encourage you all to make sure that everyone that you know understands this basic fact.